She didn't fall from grace, she lingered within its shadow. For more than 3 decades, Sarah Ferguson has been both welcomed and warned by the House of Windsor. Loved for her warmth, judged for her candour, she learned early that the monarchy accepts personality only when it behaves like silence. So she learned to smile, to write, to appear, to give. Each gesture became a form of penance, an ongoing audition for belonging. Britain applauded her optimism, the palace tolerated her distance, and the tabloids waited. But redemption inside a dynasty is never fully earned. It is rented by the headline. One lapse in judgment, one private word made public, and the balance resets. The Duchess, who had spent years proving steadiness, was once again measured by her misstep. What made her story tragic was not scandal, but repetition, the sense that even when she tried to move forward, history preferred her still. As Windsor's lamps flicker against the dusk, her image stands divided, part survivor, part reminder. The monarchy's most human face and its most inconvenient mirror. There are few things more British than a comeback, especially one staged with charm. After the collapse of her marriage, Sarah Ferguson did not retreat. She reorganised herself. With a pen, a microphone, and a disarming smile, she began to rebuild not a title, but a narrative. The Duchess, who had once been portrayed as reckless, now became the woman who could laugh at herself. Children's books bore her name. Wellness ventures promised renewal. Talk shows welcomed her candour. The unpolished warmth that royal life once punished now became her signature. Viewers saw not defiance, but endurance. It was, as one newspaper put it, the Duchess's second act. She spoke of mistakes without bitterness, of forgiveness without demand. To a public grown weary of polished detachment, she felt recognisably human. The royal, who had once embarrassed the palace, was suddenly the most relatable woman it had produced. At the centre of this new chapter were her daughters. Beatrice and Eugenie stood beside her not as symbols of scandal, but as proof of stability. Their affection was uncalculated, unroyal, and deeply persuasive. Through motherhood, she reclaimed dignity. Through work, she reclaimed relevance. But visibility came with its price. To stay seen, she had to keep performing, to remain the good Duchess in exile. Charity, humour, and self-deprecation became a routine as much as a revelation. Each television appearance brought applause, yet the shadow of exclusion never quite left the frame. The monarchy, ever cautious of sentiment, kept its distance. She was useful, not essential, tolerated, not restored. Her image had softened, but her position had not changed. The gates of Windsor were open for family gatherings, not for re-entry. In the stillness between interviews, the imbalance showed. How much of her redemption was self-made, and how much was permission, granted by a nation that liked its forgiveness photogenic. As the montage fades, charity events, children's readings, flashes of studio light, we glimpse a faint balcony she no longer occupies. The applause, though sincere, echoes against its absence. Sarah Ferguson had turned her vulnerability into currency, and for a while, it bought her peace. Yet behind the glow of reinvention lay the quiet truth of her story, that in royal life even redemption comes on loan. Redemption, as it turned out, was not free. Behind the laughter and talk show charm lay an arithmetic that never quite balanced, of debts repaid with appearances, of warmth maintained through obligation. Every new venture promised independence, few delivered it. Book advances faded, product lines faltered, and the public's affection, though steady, did not pay the bills. Sarah Ferguson had learned to turn herself into a brand, but brands, unlike crowns, must constantly justify their worth. Each project became both lifeline and risk, each interview an audition for stability. To live publicly was to keep performing, to stop was to disappear. Through it all, one presence remained constant, Prince Andrew. Long after their marriage ended, their partnership endured in a form the public struggled to define. They shared a home, Royal Lodge, a place of comfort but also of dependence. Its manicured quietness concealed an emotional arrangement that blurred friendship with survival. To some, their closeness seemed touching, evidence of compassion after chaos. To others, it hinted at an inability to let go. The Duchess's loyalty to her former husband became her most admirable quality and her most dangerous one. When Andrew's own scandals later darkened the royal landscape, her steadfast defence of him risked turning affection into association. Financially, too, the strain deepened. Reports of unpaid debts and failed ventures surfaced periodically, each one a reminder that resilience has limits. The woman who once embodied royal glamour was now described in columns of numbers. liabilities, loans, arrears. Still she smiled. Still she thanked. For Sarah, gratitude became its own form of captivity, a habit too ingrained to break. Her moral compass, built on empathy and forgiveness, began to look like complicity to those who could not see the life beneath the gesture. She was loyal to a fault, and the fault was public. In the quiet of Royal Lodge, the contradictions gathered like dust. Envelopes unopened on a desk. A candle burning beside old correspondence. Outside, the world assumed she was at peace. Inside, she was balancing affection against autonomy, faith against fatigue. The truth was never dramatic, only heavy. Her greatest comfort, the family she refused to abandon, was also the weight that kept her from rising. And so, the Duchess continued to smile for the cameras, carrying a calm that looked like grace but felt, in private, like endurance. Because sometimes, the cost of staying close to what defines you is forgetting where you end and it begins. It began, as these things often do, not with outrage, but with revelation. A message, a meeting, a transaction blurred by need. An email that travelled further than intended. A conversation that refused to stay private. Sarah Ferguson had, by most accounts, offered what she no longer possessed. Access. A chance to meet, to speak, to be near the royal circle. For a price that reflected not greed, but strain. It was not wicked. It was weary. A gesture born from the same vulnerability that had once made her endearing, and now made her exposed. But in the monarchy, perception is substance. To appear desperate is to be condemned. The press, always waiting for repetition, found its rhythm again. Headlines that had once softened turned sharp overnight. Disgraced Duchess returned to print, as if the years between contrition and collapse had never existed. The palace, restrained as ever, expressed regret. There would be no formal censure, only distance. Inside those quiet halls, embarrassment echoes louder than scandal. Her attempt at practicality was framed as betrayal. Her candour, once her strength, recast as folly. And so the story turned familiar. The woman who had built her life upon transparency was undone by her own openness. It was not deceit that cost her, but the illusion of impropriety, enough to fracture a decade of rehabilitation. The public too changed its tone. No longer cruel, just tired. Britain had seen this film before, the earnest apology, the contrite interview, the promise of renewal. Grace, granted and revoked, had become her signature story. Yet beneath the noise, something quieter unfolded. The slow exhaustion of a woman who could no longer find the line between forgiveness and survival. To live as a royal exile is to exist under glass. Every gesture magnified, every mistake immortalised. Her downfall was not scandalous, merely sad, an act of fatigue mistaken for cunning. In a world where silence protects and speech destroys, Sarah Ferguson spoke once more, and lost again. The typewriter clacks, rain traces Buckingham Gates. A phone rings, unanswered. The audience does not judge, it sighs, because what we witness is not defiance or deceit, but the ache of someone forever apologising for being too human in a house that rewards restraint. When the noise quietened, what remained was not disgrace, but distance. The palace did not condemn her, it simply forgot to call. Invitations thinned. Appearances, once routine, became selective. Her name returned to the edges of royal programmes, included when convenient, omitted when safe. It was not punishment, only precaution. A monarchy protecting itself through silence. And yet, Sarah Ferguson endured. Where others would have vanished into resentment, she persisted through visibility. Charity events, book tours, quiet interviews in sympathetic studios. She spoke again of courage, of kindness, of perseverance. Words that sounded less like publicity and more like survival. Her daughters remained her constant redemption. Beatrice and Eugenie offered her something the palace could not, belonging without condition. Together, they appeared at family gatherings, radiant and unembarrassed, proof that affection could exist even without approval. Still, the distance lingered. At royal weddings, she was seen but seldom mentioned, a silhouette on the edge of the frame. At family portraits, her absence spoke louder than her presence. The nation, watching, sensed the quiet choreography of omission. In public, Britain treated her kindly, the faint curious sympathy reserved for those who have lived too visibly. She had become part of the royal furniture, familiar, necessary, but slightly out of place. Her name still carried warmth, though rarely welcome. Even her acts of charity seemed to echo with an undertone of debt, both financial and emotional. Yet in that half-light of inclusion, she found a strange form of peace. To remain close, even in silence, was a triumph of its own kind. She had learned to exist within the monarchy's periphery, loyal, useful, never quite restored, and perhaps that is where she was most herself. Not inside the palace gates, nor fully beyond them, but somewhere in between. A duchess without a throne, yet still bowing, still smiling, still holding faith in a family that never fully let her back in. The empty chair at a royal reception, the slow pan across a family portrait where she is missing, but remembered. In those spaces her story continues, not of scandal or spectacle, but of endurance. Because Sarah Ferguson did not return to grace, she remained just outside it, proving that exile too can be lived with dignity. History rarely remembers the ones who stayed after the curtain fell. Sarah Ferguson did. When titles faded and headlines cooled, she remained, not as an emblem of scandal, but as proof that persistence can outlive permission. Her life became a quiet negotiation between love and survival. She stood beside the monarchy that once dismissed her, loyal to its symbols, bound to its silence. That loyalty was her light and her burden. It softened every accusation and shadowed every attempt to begin again. To the public, she was endlessly forgiving. To herself, perhaps endlessly unfinished. Yet in her uneven grace, she revealed something the crown itself could never fully express. That humanity, though costly, endures longer than ceremony. Fergie's contradictions were not failings, they were mirrors. Through them, Britain glimpsed the uncomfortable truth that the monarchy's strength lies not in perfection, but in the people who refuse to be erased by its standards. Her devotion to Andrew, her affection for her daughters, her insistence on optimism, all spoke of a heart unwilling to withdraw, even when prudence demanded it. It was not strategy. It was simply faith, expressed too visibly for royal comfort. And so she remains, part of the story, yet slightly beyond its frame. Neither forgiven nor forgotten, but accepted in the way familiar mistakes often are. As dawn settles over the Thames, the last light in the palace window fades. The scandal, the laughter, the exile, all dissolve into something gentler. The quiet image of a woman who never stopped showing up, even when the world had moved on. Because in the end, Sarah Ferguson's legacy is not redemption nor rebellion. It is endurance with a heartbeat. The reminder that within the monarchy's marble poise, someone once dared to stay human.